Morning again, Life Point Crossing. I'm so glad you're here. How are you guys doing with your Christmas shopping? Yeah, I hope that isn't like a sore spot for anybody. I'm not trying to poke at that, but just generally, I'm guessing probably most of us fit into one of two categories. One group of you is like, oh, it's fine, I'm done. I've been done since mid-August, late August, I don't know, whatever, just like every year. Okay. And then, of course, the other group, which is, I would suspect, the larger group, like barely started, haven't started, super stressed, overwhelmed, freaked out. This is just a regular part of my every holiday season. Well, whichever group you're in, here's why I know this is a little bit difficult, is because you put some thought into the gifts that you give the people you love. And of course, especially your children, right? You know that every gift is not appropriate for every individual. We don't get our toddlers things with small parts that could be a choking hazard. We don't get our elementary age kids things with sharp edges that they might cut themselves on. And I hope that you don't give your teenager a phone without restrictions or some variety of safeguards to protect them from themselves and others. You want to get them wonderful things that they're going to love and enjoy and be excited about, but you also want them to be safe and protected. Of course you do. Well, for December, we're talking each week about, or at least starting from a beloved Christmas movie and seeing the kinds of deeper spiritual truths that they may hint at or point past, even without recognizing it or intending to. And today, the sort of message starter is going to be from a generally pretty fun Christmas movie, but one with probably the most boring title ever, A Christmas Story. Thud. I'm all for under-promising and over-delivering, and it's not false advertising. It is A Christmas Story, but what a boring title. Pretty fun movie, though. It didn't really do that well when it first came out in 1983, but over the years it's grown, and now I think it's wildly popular and one of the better-loved Christmas movies. You probably know it was set in the 40s, even though it was released in 1983, and it's given sort of our general society a number of well-known sort of memes and phrases that have just become a part of our world and our culture. Of course, there's the enduring image of the miserable child in the awful pink bunny costume. There's his dad who loves the leg lamp. There's drink your Ovaltine. But more than any of those, you know that the movie revolves around 9-year-old boy Ralphie as he waits impatiently for Christmas. And Christmas for him at 9 was like for all of us at 9. It's really about presents and about getting. And there's one thing that he wanted more than anything else. Who here, the answer is all of us, knows what that is? Red Ryder BB gun, and some of us have extra credit. Yes, and some of us, I know, under a certain age, don't understand why anybody would want that, didn't even have a Google on it. But in the 1940s, it was really a pretty cool thing for a kid to have. And it also gives us sort of one of the running jokes of the movie where everybody who he tells what he wants, whether it's his own mother or department store Santa, has the exact same response. You know what that is also? You guys didn't even sing that much, and the words were on the screen. But yes, you'll shoot your eye out. And so, of course, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the film, which clearly is nobody, eventually Christmas does come, and he unwraps a whole bunch of gifts, and they're good, but they're not what he really wanted. So Christmas is honestly kind of a disappointment for the poor kid. Until his dad reaches back and grabs one last gift that was kind of hidden, and here it is, the one item that he coveted more than any other, and he's thrilled. Christmas is a success. He runs outside to try his new thing, and immediately, of course, shoots out at least his glasses, if it wasn't exactly his eye, I don't know. It's kind of easy, honestly, from the writer perspective, but it was pretty fun. It's really a fun movie. Even I like it. Well, even though I do like it, listen, I hope I don't have to say this. In fact, I hope this is communicated every single week here at Life Point Crossing, even without saying it, but I do not think that church or this church or following Jesus should be about taking the fun out of things. I think fun is good. I think it's from God. I think that it's right to enjoy life. Sometimes in some things and some elements of following Jesus can be very difficult, very painful, things that we wouldn't necessarily choose in the moment. But life is supposed to be enjoyed. It's supposed to be good. I don't think your spirituality is measured by how many things you're against. But should the dad really have gotten his 9-year-old a BB gun that actually had the potential to do him real harm? I mean, you understand that he knew that his child wanted it. He asked about it incessantly for the whole film. You understood that it was going to be a lot of fun. This was, again, remember in the 40s when the internet was still just getting hooked up, and for which sure people were still on dial-up. So it was a really cool thing for a kid to have a BB gun. But like this really could do some damage to things, break windows, maybe even permanently damage somebody's vision. It wasn't exactly like giving a kid a jug of Roundup or a knife juggling set, but I don't know. Like it really could potentially harm him. Is this a good idea? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that I understand why a dad would want to give his kid something that he was going to absolutely love. I understand why a dad would want to believe the best in his son, that he's responsible and mature enough to be able to handle something that carries with it a little bit of potential for damage. But I don't think he should have done that. And we're going to look at a couple of verses today from Jesus that we touched on just very, very briefly last week. We're going to think a little bit more about him today. But these are from Jesus in what we commonly call the Sermon on the Mount. And I think this is interesting. He kind of pictures us a little bit as Ralphie, the 9-year-old boy at Christmas, and God as our gift-giving Father in heaven. Here's what he says. He says, parents, if your children ask for a loaf of bread, do you give them a stone instead? Or if they ask for a fish, do you give them a snake? Of course not. So if you sinful people, you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him? And so this is Jesus talking directly about the relationship between God and human beings. And he uses the sort of picture or analogy of a child asking their parent for various gifts. And he says that you do fairly well at this, in fact. And the human parent-child relationship certainly is not the prototype from which we get the God-human relationship. The human parent-child relationship is the flawed, broken, sinful, messed up version. And he says that even with that, you do really very well on this. You do know how to give good gifts to your children. And really what this is just supposed to do is point us to and help us understand then, of course, the God-human relationship. So you guys, even as our limited, messed up human beings, like we do well, right? If I know there was a time a few years ago, a couple generations ago, when pet rocks were a thing, and so maybe parents did give their children a stone. We did allow our son to have a pet snake for a couple years. It went exactly as you would expect. But even with our limited humanness, of course, we want to give our children the best food and the best gifts we can. If your child asks for something to eat, you're not going to give them something inedible. If they ask for something to bite into, you're not going to give them something that's going to bite into them. Laura and I were talking not too long ago, actually, about when Charles was a little younger, and he started talking about getting a motorcycle when he was 18. Now, motorcycles are cool. Lots of people use them responsibly. But at least in the warmer months, I don't even drive that much, but probably once a week, I just shake my head in horror as somebody's kid goes zipping through traffic on 70 in such a way that if one vehicle swerves in a way they don't anticipate, they're going to be at the hospital at best. So we're going to get our 18-year-old a motorcycle? No, of course not. You know why? 2 reasons. Number 1, we love him. Number 2, I have been an 18-year-old. We're not going to get our child something that makes it super, super fun to literally put your life in jeopardy before he has the ability even, or the brain fully developed that understands consequences. If he still wants to get a motorcycle at 30, to be honest, I still won't really love the idea, but okay, get a motorcycle when you're 30, that's okay. Well, here we are in the middle of the Christmas season, and it's kind of amazing, actually, that it's Jesus who we're quoting and talking about to help us understand the God-human relationship, and the God is the one who gives good gifts, because, of course, Jesus himself is the one who was the gift that God gave to his people at Christmas. But this is interesting, and I think this is important. He was not what anybody was asking for. He was not what anybody thought they wanted. It was a year ago, but it was a year ago, so I hope I didn't beat this to death. If I did, it was a year ago. But before the first Christmas, when Jesus was born, the people of Israel really were waiting for and hoping for and praying, asking for a Messiah. They'd never heard of Christmas exactly, of course, but they really kind of were waiting for Christmas. This is just here for fun, but Christmas obviously relies heavily on Christ, which is the English transliteration of the Greek word Christos from our New Testament, which is just the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah. And they absolutely were waiting and hoping and asking God for a Messiah, a gift from God who would free them. And of course, generally what they were expecting and hoping and waiting for was a king. They wanted somebody who would restore their freedom and some of their national pride and national glory that had existed previously under kings like David and like Solomon, because at the time here, Israel is a very, very weak and powerless nation. They get kicked around by whoever is the big dog in the nation in the region at the time. During this time, it's the Roman Empire, and so Rome is occupied and controlled and taxing them, and they absolutely hate that. They know of nothing that they would want more than to have their freedom and national identity restored. Well, Christmas did come. They absolutely did receive the Messiah, but it wasn't the Messiah they'd really been asking for. It was, of course, spiritual king rather than political. Rather than being freed from Caesar and from taxes, they were freed from sin and death and given a new and infinitely better way to relate to and be made right to their Creator, Father God. This is the greatest gift, literally, in the history of the planet, and the reason that we celebrate Christmas in the first place. But it was not what anybody was asking for. It was not what anybody was hoping for. Who here knows that God does not always give us what we ask for or wish for? And sometimes it's confusing, or sometimes it's frustrating. But if you've ever prayed and asked God for anything, then probably you've experienced this. But God gives good gifts. This is as clear as can be, both from the words that Jesus says, as well as just his existence in the first place. Of course, ultimately, then even leading up to his death in our place. God gives good gifts, but part of giving good gifts is knowing what gifts not to give. It's from a decade and a half or whatever of time in ministry and a lifetime of being human and observing human nature. I think there are a number of, at least a couple of, very commonly prayed for, asked for things that sometimes God does not fulfill our requests. One of those that's, I think, very common, for instance, is physical healing. To be clear, I absolutely believe that God can and does heal people. I will pray for you. I do pray for you. I actually believe that I've seen a couple answers that weren't like, oh, we prayed and the surgery went well, but it was like things were one way and then God's people prayed and then things were different and there was no better explanation. So listen, if you're sick or you're hurting, I will pray for you. There is everything right about that. There is nothing wrong with that. But we do also know that the result is not always identical to the request. Sometimes people pass away. Sometimes people just have to live with bodies that some element of doesn't function in the way it's really kind of designed to. If this is you or someone you love, you're really in very good company with somebody like, for instance, the Apostle Paul, which there's a lot of speculation and uncertainty about what maybe he is or isn't talking to. There's really no way to be sure, and honestly, the details don't matter. But look at what he writes in what we call 2 Corinthians 7. This is interesting. He says, "So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud." He describes it both as from Satan and also uses the word given, and then is explaining the way it's really working for his good. We all know how ugly spiritual pride is and how hard it is to see in yourself. And he'd been himself a former Pharisee, so he was able to recognize that maybe he had some capacity for this, and so that he could be susceptible to it. And it says 3 different times, I begged the Lord to take it away. But each time he said, my grace is all you need, and that my power works best in weakness. And so now I'm glad to boast, but I'm not going to boast about my own self. I'm going to boast now about my weaknesses. Why? So that the power of Christ can work through me. This is none other than the man that God used to write about half of the books of our New Testament. He prayed and prayed and prayed repeatedly for physical healing, but God did not answer with what he wanted, because he knew that if he gave Paul what he was asking for, it would not help him, it would harm him. Because he would become proud, and then being proud, he would be working out of his own ability and his own strength. And as remarkable as a man as he was, which is going to be better, doing something in the power of Paul of Tarsus? Or look at this, he says that because he was kept from becoming proud, then it's the power of Christ that can work through him. Well, that's better. I mean, even something like this, what we call 2 Corinthians 7, do we study and pay attention to the letters that he wrote because we believe Paul was so wise and so great and so godly? I think he was those things, but no, it's because we believe that it was the power of God that was working in him. Of course, the power of God. Now, I don't know why sometimes God decides to not answer with whatever, about whatever situation or whatever thing specifically. I don't think it's always exactly like this, but here's what I do think is always exactly like this, is Paul saw the difficulties and the pain as a gift, as from God. And that takes an extraordinary level of maturity, but that is certainly a level that I think we can all learn from, even if we're not necessarily 100% there at the moment. And sometimes it's going to be very difficult, probably impossible. Probably you would drive yourself crazy trying to think about or figure and put your finger on whatever it is that God is trying to give you or keep you from with whatever the situation it is. But really, even when we can't see it, that's all going to boil down to just the very simple principle, isn't it, of just trusting God? Which, in fact, leads directly into the next thing that I know a lot of us pray for is money. How many of us have prayed for money? I have. You know how much money you have prayed for? I think I can tell you exactly. I don't know the number, the amount in dollars, but tell me if this isn't true. When you prayed for money, you pray for just enough so that you won't have to keep praying and relying on God. And so that instead of seeking him, you can just relax a little bit and just trust in your money instead. Now, if that's what's going to happen, how super quick are you going to be to rush in to answer with something like that? Now, here's some verses that I probably haven't talked about in way too long because they're so incredible. It says, people who long to be rich fall into temptation, okay, and are trapped by many foolish, okay, right, but like there's foolish and harmless. But no, these are foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. Foolish and harmful, plunged into ruin and destruction, pierced themselves with many sorrows. If this is what something is likely to do to somebody, how quick are you going to be to give it to your child whom you love? And we won't go through the whole thing, but in Proverbs 30, this is wisdom, right? So then there's it's something like a prayer that's offered, and it says, God, give me neither poverty nor riches, because if I'm too poor, I might be tempted to steal, and that would dishonor you. And if you give me riches, then I'm just self-aware enough to recognize that then it's going to be way too easy for me to lose sight of how much I need you. And guess what? My understanding that I need you is far more valuable than what those riches would provide. This is a whole nother message kind of for a whole nother day, but you guys, prosperity is a much more difficult test than poverty. Success is much more difficult than failure. It's responsible for driving far more people away from God and from seeking Him. It really is. You know that's true. This is going to go back about 20 years, so this is early in our marriage. But before Christmas one year, Laura thought about getting me a video game system for Christmas. I didn't have anything at all. She knew I'd really enjoy it, but she did not know a thing about video games. So she reached out to one of her sisters who had a husband who was more of a gamer, just for some basic information. What sort of systems are out there? What's good? How much do things cost? What's some just general information. But then in the process, she reflected and she sort of recognized that I have a history of not always being super responsible about my hobbies. I can get pretty obsessive about things. This is in fact true. And so she decided to not get me something that really would have a good potential of making me kind of less of a husband. And to be very honest, she was thinking very, very clearly about this. This is, in fact, a real and present danger. So she decided that she went a different way. I had no idea that any of this took place until several months later when, imagine her surprise, when it's her birthday and her sisters surprise her with, guess what? You didn't see this coming, it's a PlayStation. Because you remember when you were asking and you were interested in it? And if you could have seen her face, her surprise was great, and so was my enthusiasm. As for her birthday, I got effectively what she did not want me to have. It was a magical moment for me. But I was probably not the better for it. And of course, we made it through. Our marriage survived, but I'm not sure that our marriage was really better for it either. Is it possible? Is it possible? I don't know, but is it possible that perhaps the reason that God has not answered your prayers for greater wealth is because He's a good God who gives good gifts to His children and doesn't want to give you something which you're going to end up piercing yourself with many sorrows and driving you away from Him, who is of ultimate value and the real center of life and reality. In fact, I'm not God, but if I was, listen, I'm not God, but I wonder if I wouldn't have maybe something of a policy or kind of a rule of thumb where the more somebody asked me for money, the more hesitant I would be to answer that request. I wonder if I wouldn't think, you know what, this is a pretty good indication that maybe they're not really ready to handle this responsibly. Let's first let them learn contentment. Let's first let them seek gratitude and godliness. And then, perhaps later, once they've come to the point where they are no longer seeking wealth, maybe that would be a really good indication that this is something that they would be okay with. Maybe now this is something where they will not be shooting their eye out. And then, I don't know, I might be delighted to just rain down all sorts of fun stuff on them once we know that this is safe. Now, again, I'm not God. I do not know if God works like that or thinks like that, but just a thought, just an idea. I don't know if I might be a little bit like that if I were God. And listen, to be hopefully clear, if you have financial need, there is everything right about seeking that in your provider. That is good and right and godly. But I wonder if maybe we wouldn't do a little better to pray a little bit less of, well, God, give me that next promotion. Give me that big raise. Give me that bigger house or that newer car or the better iPhone. And more to pray, God, thank you so much for not giving me more than I would have been able to responsibly use. Thank you for not giving me something that would have me losing sight of you and my need for you. Thank you for not giving me something that I would trust in rather than you. You guys, it's true. Prosperity is a very, very difficult and dangerous test. And if I'm not going to be able to pass the next level, thank you so much for not letting me find out. And then just to mention very briefly, I know I talk about this, but I think it's remarkable, but even Jesus himself, he made a request that the Father chose not to fulfill. In the night before he was arrested and ultimately went to the cross, he recognizes that a truly superhuman situation is about to be upon him. And he goes and he prays fervently. Is there some other way? Is there a way around it? Is there a plan B somehow here? But your will, not mine. And of course, in that case, the answer is we're going to have to go through this. And in that moment, at least in that moment, Jesus does not receive what he asks for. But because of that, you and me are able to be forgiven and stand on his righteousness before God rather than our own very flawed performance. Aren't you glad that sometimes God does not give us what we ask for? Because part of giving good gifts is knowing what gifts not to give. You wouldn't give your child a Cobra, right? You're not going to give a diabetic Christmas M&Ms. You're not going to give a cupcake to someone with celiac disease. You're not going to give an 18-year-old a motorcycle, right? And if us, as just limited, flawed, broken human beings, we know how to give good gifts and what gifts not to give to the people who you love. How much more does God give good gifts and know what gifts not to give? Because he's a good God who loves you. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for saving me from the things that I had no understanding that I even needed saving from. Thank you for allowing me to live a life that still seeks you and desires you and recognizes you as the center of everything and the most valuable thing that there is in life. And in fact, you are yourself, the meaning of life in the universe in the first place. I'm still praying if you're here today and maybe for whatever reason you've never taken that step to receive the forgiveness and righteousness of Jesus that we just mentioned about. Maybe it has something to do with not understanding unanswered prayer or why are things not a different way than they are. I don't know. Maybe it has nothing to do with any of that. But the situation is simple. We are flawed, broken, sinful human beings. Every one of us has sin. There have been things that were wrong. We knew they were wrong. We do them anyway. And for God to be a good, just judge, that has to face consequence that we cannot make right as limited human beings before a perfect and holy and infinite God. But that is why Jesus came and lived and died in our place to satisfy that justice for us with his infinite righteousness as he himself, the God existing in human flesh. Listen, just right where you are, right where you sit, whether you're here in the room or watching online, you can just pray and ask God. You say out loud or even in your heart, God will hear you. Pray, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so that I could be forgiven and adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be, and give me the life that you have for me. And if you just prayed a prayer like that for the first time, it's not the words or the prayer that saves you. It's that you have your faith in Jesus, and God's grace comes to you through that. You are forgiven and adopted in a new spiritual creation in Jesus Christ. This is the greatest thing that can happen in your life. The next thing is, please don't try and live this life alone. Let somebody know. You can go out to the point. That's just the corner in the lobby when we're done. Let the person there know the decision you've made. They'll take your information. We'll be able to follow up with you if you're online. Send us a message. We just want to give you some good steps toward the new life that God has for you. We are so excited about what God is doing right here in our midst amongst us. For the rest of us, if you've been a follower of Jesus and you've been a prayer, you know what it's like to not have probably know what it's like to have a prayer answered, but you also probably know what it's like not to. It's difficult, it's frustrating, it's confusing. We sometimes ask why. We do not know the answer. Here's what it comes down to: can we just trust God? That's why He's God. And I don't know whether it's Him saving us or protecting us for something or whatever the ways or reasons of God are, but we trust that He, as the God who loves us and who gives good gifts, knows what He's doing. And we just, between yourself and the Spirit of God here, you commit to accepting even what we don't understand, and not that it's just to stop praying. There's every reason in the world to continue praying if that's a situation that would deem that, but to understand and rest and trust in the goodness of God. And Father, we are so grateful for, we don't even know what to be grateful for, the things you keep out of our way, out of our path, out of our life, so that we can be your people, seeking you and finding ourselves in you and being found in you. And that is who we are and what we desire to be, for our good, absolutely, and for your glory, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.